The question of directionality, I have to go back to the original statements I made about transformation. So what I said is that transformation had two aspects to it as far as I presented it to you. One aspect was the idea that in a moment, what transformation allows for is the content that you're experiencing to remain constant. It is what it is. This is a flip chart with some markers on a shelf and blah, blah, blah. That's what it is. In transformation, how I perceive it, what it represents to me, my relationship to it, can change immensely. It becomes something radically different for me. Same way my relationship with you can change radically in a moment of transformation. Okay? This is something that we actually have a tremendous affinity for. If you think about some of the more dramatic movies you may have watched in time, one of the things that is often occurring in drama is that one or more of the characters experiences transformation. There's a relationship that's between two characters, and then something occurs, and that relationship is radically different. People remain the same, but now the relationship is shifted. They go from being enemies to friends, or from opponents to lovers, or something of that nature. That's a transformational change. The content remains constant, but the relationships shift. That's one aspect of transformation. That make sense? The second thing that I said is that transformation for me has a certain quality of impacting performance. In other words, what we're able to do, one of the things Laura was saying is that the choices we have access to become different by virtue of transformation having occurred. I become able to access or not access, as the case may be, certain choices that might have been unavailable to me before. And then it shows up behaviorally in the actions I take. And again, this is a result or the impact of transformation. Well, what I want to add in at this point is I want to add in that transformation for me, as I said, resides at the somatic level. But because it's at the somatic level, because the fundamental transformation occurs in the body first and not in all of the cognitive processing, what I'm saying is that it's a largely unconscious process. What we're talking about is that you show up here on Monday morning, 2 days ago, and you have a fundamental pattern that you process in the unconscious domain. The way you perceive the world. When you walk into the room, what you notice for and what you attend to and what you don't. Okay? Your ability to maintain your attention and at what level. When do you tune in and when do you tune out? All of these things are largely unconsciously processed. You're not necessarily making decisions about it. And since this unconscious process precedes, is before what you do consciously, it determines what you'll do consciously. In other words, you think you're thinking, as I said, and you're not. You're thinking what you've already thought. Except the thoughts that you're thinking were predicated on thoughts you never realized had been thought. They were out of your awareness. They were driven at what I call the sensorial level. The sensory experience is already present. You're having a response to it. There's this massive feeling or affective impulse. And that's already in the system, generating the ground upon which all of the further cognition occurs, and you think you're making decisions in some way independent of that, because you're not even aware that it exists. Well, if that's so prevalent, if that's driving so much of the experience that you have in the world, including the behavior or actions that you'll take, well, then we must, at some level, if we want to create transformation, improve performance in a significant way, change that fundamental ground, that unconscious process. Right? So there were two things that I'll share with you that this man that I studied with, Roy, said. One that he said remarkably frequently. And he would talk about this idea of the excitatory bias, or being organized in relation to positive form, possibility. Okay? And he said this was kind of a binary observation, or a binary choice. You can either be organized to the excitatory or the inhibitory. And this is absolutely prevalent in all the work I've done for the last 20-odd years, is this learning I developed with Roy of this excitatory versus inhibitory. You can be positively organized, or you can be inhibitively or negatively organized. You can choose for possibilities, or you can choose for limitations. really a separation of bias. And one of the phrases that Roy would use in regard to choosing the excitatory, being organized in an excitatory way, is to go to where the problem is not. So I said we were going to start doing some interventions today. Remember that yesterday afternoon? Interventions are predicated on the idea that the person experiences in some way a limitation. In essence, what they're having is at some level, they're accessing this inhibitory bias. The lens that they're using about something or another is inhibitory, limiting, as far as they're concerned. And we're going to say, how can we make a shift there? How can we take this experience of being limited and move it over to this place where they're unlimited, where they have the sense that they can do anything, where possibility reigns? Well, we have to go to where that problem, as they perceive it, isn't. Get it? That problem isn't here. It doesn't exist here. So therefore, they don't have to resolve it. They don't have to fix it. They don't have to work on it. They don't have to fix themselves in regard to the problems they have, because there isn't a problem here. So the question doesn't become, how do we fix the problem? The question becomes, how do we move the person? You get that? Then the other thing that Roy would say, which was much less common for him to say, and often when he said it, he would say it in passing, almost like playfully or like it was unimportant. So I think a lot of the people who probably heard him say it never picked up that he'd ever even said it. But he would make a comment to the effect of, the work that he did was to put people into their right mind. And sometimes he would even say the word brain. I would put people in their right brain. And you would hear it with the ambiguity. There's a double entendre there. Right as in correct. Their correct mind. The proper way of organizing, right? Or their right brain. The right way of thinking. The correct way of thinking. The proper way of thinking. But there's also the literalness of right as we use them in left and right. So your right brain operates differently. It organizes differently. It's attending to different information in the environment than your left brain does. Your right brain is attending to what, first of all, I refer to and others as whole form structure, the totality. Not the bits and pieces, not the details, not the linearity or the temporal forms, but rather as though all things are happening all at once. And we can make an argument that for the right hemispherical processing, the only time that ever exists is now. The only place that ever is here. And that space-time continuum of the here and now is the only space and time that the right hemisphere ever attends to. In order to have a sense of past and future, it requires a left brain processing. You get that? If the left hemisphere was non-functional, you would not have a sense of past and future. It would not exist for you as far as we can tell. And we could break down the modularity of the brain further and talk about things like the lobes of the brain, such as the frontal or prefrontal lobes, and how in the left prefrontal lobes there's even more of a sense of future orientation. But for the general conversation we're having, we can simply make it the right brain and left brain considerations. Right? So the right brain also does something else that's unique to it in terms of its processing. Where the left brain is intrigued by, you could say, it lights up, it gets excited by, literally at a physiological level, it gets excited by the ideas of abstraction and symbolic representation. The right brain is iconically organized, and you could say it gets excited by sensual forms. When there's a massive intake of sensual data, the right brain now becomes dominant. I did a program 2 weeks ago in Denmark. I was running a program on conversational hypnosis. And what I said to that group at that time was largely something to this effect. What I want to do as a result of what we're doing this week is to get you to the point where you have a choice about thinking with right brain dominance. Because when you're operating in right brain dominance, you're in an altered state for most people. You'll be operating out of the hypnotic structure that we would think of as hypnosis. For me, hypnosis is an everyday phenomenon. It is a special state. because it's not the ordinary state that most people process their life through. But it's an ordinary state in the sense that you don't have to do anything to achieve it. You don't have to learn it. You have to go somewhere to study it, to have it. By virtue of a particular combination of stimuli being present in a particular moment, you'll go into right brain dominance. In that moment, you're in what we would call hypnosis. You're experiencing the world hypnotically. And you're allowing the sensory form to become dominant. Okay? So how do we get there? That's going to become the next question. How do we get to right brain dominance?